To be serious, as opposed to the video about the philosopher Martin Heidegger, I think it's very timely for me at least because I'm giving a presentation tomorrow about, among other things, the way philosophy is, as Socrates put it, the learning to die. Socrates, for Socrates, philosophy was a sort of preparation for death, and I think it's significant that Socrates, for all intents and purposes, committed suicide for, in some sense, a new kind of honor, where even though he knew he was right and would be on the side of truth in this trial that the Athenians held him to, and I think for Heidegger, this is, well, it's really the core of his whole way of thinking, that our mortality, which is to say our temporality, our being in the world process, and our being in time, that this is essentially our essence, our being. This is where we begin to philosophize as historical creatures embedded in a world process, embedded in this ongoing, and in some sense evolving, presencing of being, of what there is. I think for Heidegger, language and what we mean by consciousness, these concepts have to be reorganized because for Heidegger, language isn't a tool used by consciousness to somehow represent its ideas. Instead, for Heidegger, we're inside of language, and language and being have a very intimate relationship, such that really the history of being doesn't begin until language has taken possession of the human being, which is the reverse of how we normally think of it, that the human being took possession of language. Now, I think, of course, what Heidegger is trying to get us to see and to do, to know and to practice in his philosophy, is that we are always already doing language, that we are always already caught up in an ongoing conversation, which we didn't even choose to begin. We are born into the world and wake up as participants in a particular culture at a particular point in its history. Not to mention as particular species, as Homo sapiens. And from that, mysterious beginning, we work our way into some sort of participatory understanding of the world around us. We begin to take hand of the world and make it based upon our own projects. And in fact, for modern people, Heidegger saw that we live in our projects. We are basically in the future. So much so that we carry death with us in the present. So we are so forward-leaning, so thrown into time, that we actually carry that anxiety about dying with us in our every waking moment, and certainly it gets expressed in dream imagery as well when we sleep. So in Being in Time, which is a book that I read when I was in college while I was taking a course on existentialism, and didn't understand a lot of it, but that's not to say it didn't have an effect on my way of thinking. I think there are some philosophers like Heidegger or like Hegel, even or even Kant, um, who one can read and misunderstand, and yet still be positively affected by it. In some sense, philosophy is far less systematic than we always make it out to be, and each philosopher is more of a poet who evokes uh, new forms of thinking by performing them in their own work. Uh, and so it's a mistake to think that a philosopher is somehow trying to represent a pre-existent truth through some sort of a philosophy of description, as if one were outside of the phenomena. And Heidegger is kind of responding to Husserl, who may be interpreted as, well, wanting the philosopher to be able to step out of uh, the world process and somehow observe it without participating. Heidegger is making a move more towards, it's an incarnational move. It's a move towards the body, towards time, and towards mortality. And when Heidegger talks about our being toward death, he's talking about this, very modern or postmodern, whatever. It's a modern condition of anxiety where we are aware of the nothingness which underlies all of the various somethings that we experience in our conscious, rational, waking lives. The ego is led through life desiring one thing after the next, whatever it might be, but then, we develop neuroses or even psychoses when the ego uh, is interrupted in this game of desiring objects and seeking its own powers. That's involved as well. Um, Whenever this seeking after objects of desire gets um, fouled up for the ego, we end up with a neurosis where our conscious and unconscious halves are failing to cooperate, and there needs to be some sort of a reconciliation between our uh, egoic existence and our unconscious envelope. And Heidegger is trying to make us conscious of what is always at the very center of our experience, but which we nonetheless ignore. Because when we ignore it, we become neurotic. And Heidegger is trying to allow us to be relieved by squarely facing death as a present reality, not as a future possibility, but a present reality. You are dying. Thinking is a form of destruction. It's neurons die every day because we think, and whatever will is, it has a destructive effect on the physical body because it interferes with what would naturally have happened. And now, Heidegger, while he wants to re-embody the mind and get us out of this Cartesian tradition, is nonetheless still talking about spirit in the way that Hegel spoke about it. And I think this spirit is having, it is some sort of a transcendent intelligence which is working with and necessarily related to the material world and the physiological organism which we are. For Heidegger, being would be equivalent to the sort of physical world that is, and time would be the evolution of spirit. And in this evolution, being and time, or matter and spirit, are each transformed.